I'm Andy Kimball, and I work at Cockroach Labs. And of course, that is a distributed SQL database. Are all of you familiar? Yes? Kind of? Okay. All right. Well, I've worked on a lot of different projects here at Cockroach Labs. And the thing that I've been working on most recently is some software that makes it easier to install and manage a distributed database, orchestration software kind of stuff. And when I started, I first started thinking about how to make it easy for humans to use the database. But pretty soon, I started pivoting over to thinking about how easy it would be for agents to use the database. So that was a big shift. I think it's only going to become more important that agents using databases. So this is, I think, not just using the database from an application code point of view, but also installing the database and managing it and troubleshooting queries, all that kind of stuff. So I started in Microsoft actually back in 1996, and at that point, we had these things called the MSDN CD-ROMs. Maybe some of you remember. Yeah, exactly. So they'd show up, maybe once a quarter, and you put them in your CD-ROM drive, and you go look up the documentation that you need. And then in 1998, the internet came along far enough that it all went online, and so then you went out using your browser and look up a URL to go to the MSDN documentation online. Then a couple of years after that, Google came along and then swallowed everything. And of course, the CD-ROMs on my shelf started gathering dust at that point. The whole shift maybe took 5 years from CD-ROMs to the internet or the web and then to search. So it was a very big shift, very fast. And I think that what's happening right now with AI feels bigger to me than the internet, which is, I've lived through both, and I think this is bigger. So I think up until about November of last year, AI assistance was kind of hit or miss. We had these earlier models, there was earlier tooling, and a lot of engineers were just trying it out here and there, but it was very unreliable. And so sometimes you'd spend as much time fixing what it gave you as you would have done just building it yourself. And then I think it was sometime around November, probably Claude 4.5 or so, where the models really crossed the threshold. It was very noticeable. There's better code and better reasoning, fewer hallucinations. And so the adoption since then has really climbed an amazingly steep curve. Google recently said that 75% of their new code is AI assisted with engineers reviewing. Anthropic puts it at 70 to 90%. Even 6 months ago, I probably would have been very skeptical of claims like this because these are AI companies, and of course, they're going to talk up their stats about their developers. But we're seeing similar numbers within Cockroach Labs. At least, my estimate, back of the envelope, is that probably at least 75% of our commits are AI assisted with a human and agent working together. I'm curious, though, how many of you have actually seen sort of dramatic adoption curves within the companies that you're seeing? Any feedback? Go ahead. Anything you want to add to that?
I would agree.
Okay.
I think it's getting to be even higher.
Yeah. Where are you all? What companies are you all at? Okay.
Construction company, so we're a little behind in software and all that stuff.
Are you using AI tools yourself as a developer?
Just it's pretty basic at this point. I'm not full on anything, but just general IE, assistance with that. But trying to get into it a little bit more, trying to help everybody be more efficient and expand the use of it within the company. Because I know the CEO is very into it. He's very all about it. So.
Yeah, great. Anything you want to add?
Well,
Okay.
I'm an engineer founder, so
Uh-huh.
for me the percentage is whatever I choose to be, and I choose to make it high. I rarely need to write large blocks of code
Mhm.
anymore.
Right.
And I keep increasing the scope of complexity of tasks that I keep to flow code for now and the Opus model, and I'm experimenting with switching to multi-agentic workflows for like coding and validation and
Mhm.
These can push
Yeah, yeah.
develop and let me develop faster.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, I think that's matches my own personal experience. I don't think I've hand coded anything for maybe 6 months now. Um, I pretty much coding at this point, I see it as the agent's job to actually write the code. My job is to sort of inject my judgment, my experience, my business context, and then we kind of, I spend actually probably a large part of my day just in an agent loop, going back and forth with Cloud Code and just sort of iterating in a loop with it until the code and the design are at least as good as what I would have done myself. And so it's a completely new experience. The internet, of course, kind of changed what software gets built, but I think AI changes how it's built. Okay, so the other thing that I've observed is that a lot of R&D teams have been using these tools for some time, but it's now starting to catch on beyond just the R&D organizations within companies. It's beginning to shape how these entire organizations think. So a year ago, the CEO of Shopify sent a memo to the employees of Shopify and told every team that if they wanted to hire somebody or they wanted more resources, that they first needed to show why AI couldn't handle the work. So it was around the same time that the CTO of Goldman came out, and they have 12,000 engineers, and he basically said that they were planning on deploying hundreds, if not thousands, of autonomous coding agents, is what the CTO called them. And the term was sort of a hybrid workforce. And then, of course, we have MCP, which has exploded from maybe 2 million downloads a year, 18 months ago, to about 97 million today. So like every trend is sort of up and to the right. And it's really moved beyond just, say, engineers working with this stuff on the side. It is now entire organizations are building around it. So I want to talk a little bit about not just what's happening in these big companies, but also what's happening within our own organization. We had actually an engineer kind of as a side project, built this tool called Mica, which is essentially a wrapper around the AI agents, but it also gives access to all of our internal company data. And that's incredibly powerful because this agent now has access to the data warehouse. It has access to, if you grant it, to like email, personal calendars, Jira tickets, Slack messages, GitHub repos, everything. And so if you ask it a question, it has all of this context that it can search and give you back an answer. And it sounds like a very simple idea, and I know that there's a lot of companies building this, but it is incredibly powerful. And so here is like our usage graph of like what we saw when Mica got turned on about 2 months ago. And it was really built for non-engineers, because the engineers, we were already using Cloud Code and other tools, but this was built for non-engineers. And you can see that on the left here, we had a couple maybe early adopters. Then week over week, saw extremely fast growth until at this point, at least 60% of the company is using this on a daily basis. And of course, this doesn't even include the engineers who are just using Cloud Code and not this tool. So the heaviest users are actually our finance and sales organizations, which again, they're not coders, right? What Mica gives them is this ability to build dashboards and simple web apps. And then Mica, of course, is connected to all of these internal data sources. So these folks in our sales and finance teams, They build their own dashboards and applications that are custom for their own like little corner of the company. And these are tuned by them to do exactly what they need for their particular role, with all, yet grounded in the data that they have available to them, like say in Salesforce. So I'll show you a couple of the apps like that actually some of these teams have built. Okay, so this here is an internal dashboard that our sales team built to track deal pipeline and progress. So it can pull data from our data warehouse. You can pull it from Salesforce. And the sales team actually built a lot of different applications. Like they have dashboards that look at individual accounts, that support the sales development outreach, also that qualify deals and other things like that. So I'm also curious, have you all seen any non-engineers in your companies or your circles beginning to use these tools and get real benefit out of them? Not really?
It's a little small for that, like I said, so.
Yeah.
The industry of like construction is, because it's slower to adopt kind of like a healthcare or something like that.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I mean, I think we were all surprised at how quickly, so, everything, there's this drumbeat of like AI, that a lot of companies are being subjected to right now by their CEOs. And we certainly had that, no question. But I think the non-engineers weren't really sure what that meant for them. And then again, this engineer built this internal tool and they're like, oh, that's what we're supposed to do with this stuff. And then it just really, really caught on like wildfire. So if I had to predict, I think that the AI companies will begin fighting with one another over who gets to build this kind of tool. And of course, Cloud Cowork is a good example of like an early tool along these lines. But they're going to start seeing this, I think, as the next big battleground. Because whoever gets a tool like this in the hands of all these, not just engineers, but non-engineers, is going to drive their model and their company's reputation and their, and ultimately a ton of revenue through this. So that would be my prediction. If you look over the next year, I think we're going to see lots of tools like this built by lots of startups and lots of big vendors like the big frontier model companies, and they're going to start being pushed out in the market. So here's another example of an app. This is a interactive workload simulator that was built by one of our PMs, our product managers. And it just took a handful of prompts, and without AI, in the past, this would have been an engineering project. So again, I think the stat is that we have maybe 550 people. And in the last 2 months, something like 1,300 dashboards and applications have been built by that number of people, which is pretty amazing. Like, again, if it's just engineers, maybe you couldn't believe that, but non-engineers building applications, it's a different world here that we're entering. So we've talked a little bit about applications, but now, of course, I want to talk about the database. And almost every real-world application out there is, of course, built on a database. And sorry, let me just grab this. Okay, so yeah, every database or every application has this database. And I have to say, as a database guy, it kind of saddens me to say that for many engineers, working on the database they see it as kind of a chore. For me, it's like my lifeblood, but for most engineers, it's kind of a chore. And so they try to avoid it. And after I left Microsoft's database team, I joined Square, called Block now, and I led an application development team. And it sort of opened my eyes as to because I was around a bunch of database people, we all love databases. And so it was my first sort of exposure to, okay, engineers who don't work on databases. And we were building this small business loan product called Square Capital, and we were using MySQL and Ruby on Rails. And what we noticed was that every few months, the same thing would happen. We would have an engineer who would write a new query, or maybe change an existing query, and this would pass all the tests. It would work great in our dev test environments, and then we'd push it out to production, and boom, it would blow up. And it was maybe too slow because it hadn't been optimized, or sometimes it would have contention with other queries in production, and the whole thing would just sort of lock up, and we'd have like a P1 incident that everybody would be running around on. And I remember there was one time when we started getting alerts because our loan pipelines were beginning to fall behind. And so we traced the problem to a query that had recently shipped but had not been optimized. And of course, to me, debugging a slow query is actually kind of a fun, interesting puzzle. I like to do it. In fact, I actually worked on the query optimizer at CockroachDB. It was my first thing I did. And so I love optimizers, and I love optimizing slow queries. And so I didn't want to take that fun assignment for myself. So naturally, I offered it to my team. Like who wants to figure out how to optimize this query? I thought it was kind of a plum assignment, but no one raised their hand. And I learned that day that if you're lucky, maybe your team has that one engineer who actually understands the database, who enjoys working with it, who understands how queries are executed and optimized. And everyone else tends to find it kind of a chore. And so when something actually breaks, they all turn and they look at that one person and expect that one engineer to solve the problem. So I think that engineer is now going to be an agent. So I think this is the world that we are rapidly entering. I think that agents are going to write application code that queries the database, that optimizes queries for you. Just like you kind of hand off your code right now to your agent, you're going to be handing off some of those annoying database tasks that you would really like to hand off to the agent. So this is things like maybe installing the database to begin with, upgrading it, maybe running schema migrations, debugging slow queries, definitely. We actually already use agents to handle support incidents within CockroachDB, like really complex distributed system problems. We send the agent, and it looks at all the logs and all the metrics, and more often than not, it actually can figure out these really gnarly problems. It is truly amazing. So I think the key will be for the databases of the future is, I think the day is not far off when the only humans that are going to be interacting with these databases are annoyed humans. And that's because these humans will be annoyed that the agent couldn't take care of the problem itself. Or maybe they're going to be annoyed at the database vendor. Like, why didn't you make it easy enough for my agent to understand your database? So I think that's what we're going to see. Here was, I think, ChatGPT's visualization of that. And I think I don't know, that's how I feel now. Like if I fire Claude off and it stops with some problem, I always feel a little bit irritated now. Like, why couldn't you fix that? Why couldn't you code that thing up? There's like a little bit of annoyance, even though I know it's not rational, but I feel a little annoyed. And I think, this is what it's going to feel like to people whose, the agent isn't able to debug that slow query. They're going to feel that way. So I think the work ahead is to figure out what causes these kind of escalations where the agent has to go back to the human because it gets stuck. And we got to figure out what those sources of friction are and eliminate them. So I'm going to give you a couple examples from CockroachDB. The first is an explain statement for an execution plan. But if an agent calls this, it's going to get back a URL that was really meant for humans. And if it has the permission to follow the URL, and a lot of times it won't, but if it did, it would land on a web page that has this visual diagram that was meant for humans and not for agents. So this really is going to make it hard for an agent who is trying to debug a query, right? So take the second example. We actually have this CLI that we ship, one of the CLIs that we ship, And when the agent tried to use it, it tried to use a flag called -- format JSON, because that's the way a lot of the tools that it had been trained on support this JSON format. But our tool, at least at the time, didn't support that. And so it got stuck. It burned tokens. It had to go and retry stuff. And then the third example, this actually hit one of our customers. They were using agents to build code that interface with CockroachDB. And unlike most humans, agents are really happy to kind of dig around in your source code. They're happy to just try stuff out and see what sticks. And in this case, an agent found an undocumented support in CockroachDB for cross-database transactions. And it really, it confidently recommended these transactions as like, hey, this is a great idea. You should do this. And the customer team, they followed this advice. They built a fairly complex system that depended on coordinating distributed transactions across multiple databases with different vendors. And if you know anything about databases, you know that is a really, really tough problem. And so kind of predictably, their coordinator failed in some sort of edge case, and transactions were left blocking, and they had a partial outage. And it was really tough for us to figure it out because we were not expecting customers to be using this feature. So it was manifesting in a way that was kind of odd, strange. And we really had to dig down before we said, oh, this is, the agent actually recommended this feature because it was there, and we just hadn't documented it. So they're going to explore, agents will explore every inch of your surface area, whether or not you have documented it or not. They're going to find those sharp edges. They're going to recommend them without necessarily the accompanying warnings. So we are working on removing all these kinds of friction points like this. And I think that every database vendor out there is probably doing the same. I assume they are. We're moving into this future where agents are the user, not humans. And one pretty nice thing about removing this friction from agents is that we can measure it directly and also over time. So what we've started doing, and again, I think every software team needs to start doing this for their product, is we designed a benchmark. And that means we point the agent at our database and we run it through a set of standardized tasks. And we measure things like, can it complete the task? How many attempts does it take to do that? How many tokens does it burn? How long does it take to run? And we call it like the agent experience benchmark. And we can run it against ChatGPT and Claude, the different agents, and then feed that information kind of back into our development process, because now we know in an automated way, like, what is the agent experience like for our database? So that's pretty powerful. I think that, I'm sure you all know about user experience, but I think user experience research for humans is now becoming agent experience research, but for AI now. Yeah. Anybody here have any contact with that kind of testing? Have you done anything like this? Is your product even something that you would expect agents to use? Not really. I think if you're building a product where, if you're, say, I don't know, thinking like Figma or actually Google Slides. When I was trying to make this presentation, I was having Claude try to generate these slides, and it was just a disaster. I mean, the Google Slides does not work with agents at all. It's amazing how bad it is. It creates these, like, I don't know, just full text, or these text slides, no formatting, nothing. It just looks like garbage.
LaTeX works with agents.
What's that?
LaTeX works with agents.
Oh, okay. All right, yeah. Probably have to switch over to something else.
60 years of technology.
Yeah. Well, that's the thing. I think that Google, probably their product teams, I hope their product team, their slides product team, is like super worried about this, because it opens up this massive door for any competitor who comes out and does this. I think there's a big business opportunity here for anybody who can actually make their slides product work. In fact, I actually had this colleague who told me, you shouldn't even be using Google Slides. You should just have Claude generate an HTML presentation, because it actually is better than what Google Slides, and it will do it all for you. Whereas with Google Slides, you got to go and do a bunch of manual stuff. So, True. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. I agree. I mean, it's not a panacea or anything, but I think it puts Google on notice and every other product out there. So you see all these different companies out there scrambling, like Figma comes to mind for me, scrambling to try to build in these AI agent experiences. So again, that's the way that we're thinking about this shift, at least for our database. All right, so just checking our time here, but I think I'll skip that one. So I want to tell another little story here, and maybe you have all heard this, but this is pretty interesting, and I noticed it on Twitter and sort of pushed the tweet out within Cockroach. But a couple of weeks ago, it was actually very recent. There's this guy named Jared Crane. He was a founder of a business that's called Pocket OS, and they build software for rental car companies. And he tweeted and got, I think, 7.1 million views. And the title of his tweet was, "An AI agent just destroyed our production data, and it confessed in writing," which I thought was super amusing. Like, well, what does the confession of an AI agent mean? I don't know. But attached to that tweet was a 2,500 word account of this catastrophic event that had brought down his business. So he was using Anthropic's, their flagship model, Claude Opus. I think it was maybe 4.5 or 4.6 or something. So it was like cutting edge AI agent. And he had configured it with, like, he said, all caps, safety rules, to never guess, never ever run destructive operations without asking a human first, And in this particular occasion, the agent was working on, I think it was a routine task in staging. He thought, what can I do wrong, right? But it ran into a problem with its staging credentials, and the staging credentials had stopped working. So of course the AI agents are trained to just look for a different way, right? So instead of asking for, stopping and asking for human assistance, this agent started looking around, and it came across a root level API token that was actually meant for managing web domains. But the agent's like, what the heck, I'll try it, I'll try it and see what happens with the database. And, sure enough, the agent thought it was operating in staging, and so it actually used this token to delete the database volume. And it was actually the production volume that it had just deleted. And so in 9 seconds, car rental shops across the country couldn't tell who was supposed to take which car when. And even worse, the backups had been stored on the same volume. So those were now gone too. So huge disaster. They spent the weekend rebuilding what they could. They said from Stripe receipts. And then, of course, they fielded lots of calls from angry customers. So I think it's actually pretty tempting to blame the development team that this happened to. They could have run the agent in a sandbox. They could have kept tighter control over credentials. They could have stored the backups off-site, all of the best practices. But I think it's the wrong lesson to learn. It's the wrong lesson for people building agents. It's the wrong lesson for people building application tooling. And it's definitely the wrong lesson for people building databases. Because it's our job to build in the guardrails and the governance and all of these default protections into the platform so that application developers, they don't have to become infrastructure developers just to use these products and to be able to use AI agents, because they're incredibly powerful, incredibly useful. It's the platform's job to make it safe to use these agents. So that's kind of the way that I see our mission in the, say, next year at Cockroach Labs when it comes to AI agents, is we want to build that kind of platform that is really easy for these agents to use, that is safe for these agents to use, so that as the application developer, you get a bunch of work off your plate without compromising your safety. Okay, so maybe I'll end with a couple slides here. The first thing is that building these applications has never been easier. And of course, when you make something easy, it gets done more often. and then you multiply that pattern across all of the companies in the world, and you consider that every non-trivial app needs persistent state and therefore needs a database. And you see that there's going to be this explosion of databases. As I showed you how easy it is now to build these applications, there's going to be an explosion. There already is. And with that is going to come this explosion of traffic. Every single AI agent is going to start hammering websites because they don't act like humans. They hammer the website. They send out like parallel requests. And traffic spikes that used to be routine suddenly now are happening all the time. Patterns that used to be these weird edge cases are now happening on a routine basis. Agents also, you can deploy as many as you like, as fast as you like. There's just not the same built-in limits that humans have. So maybe this will be the last thing I show here, which is this dramatic example of what's coming. And this is from GitHub. The CEO of GitHub posted this. And all of their core metrics, pull requests merged, commits, new repositories, they're all hockey sticking. This is just the last couple of weeks that they posted this. They're just going through the roof. And they had to actually revise their capacity plan from a 10x plan to a 30x plan. And their reliability has dropped to maybe about 86% in certain recent months, which is awful for infrastructure. You look for 3 nines with important infrastructure, and GitHub has been falling down to 86%. So I think GitHub is this leading edge. They're feeling it first because they're closest to it. They're closest to this agentic build out that's going on. And I think, though, it is a matter of time before it starts hitting companies of every size and that they have to sort of encounter their own version of this thing that's happening. All right, so on our end, we're making CockroachDB ready for the agentic era. And a couple things to maybe think about, plan for this agent traffic. It might be coming for your application. Think about who your user is. Maybe it's an agent now rather than a human. And then build safety directly into the platform. Don't expect your users, because they're now agents, to do the right thing. And then imagine a future where your agent is going to run your database for you. And that's it. Thank you.